Hello, and welcome to an adventure like no other. Far more than what you have known, there is something far more to be known than you can ever know. And it is all about you, the real you, your real awareness with your intuitive senses. You were never taught that the real you, your real awareness, is operating 5 bodies in cause and effect, restricting creation. You have been taught to think that you are only a one-dimensional human person, with a mind and emotions, and with a very short lifespan on this planet Earth. More than what your mind can grasp is your intuitive senses that can be opened to see beyond all your restrictions. You have always had an opening to see beyond what you have known, and this has been purposely kept from you, and this is where you have heard rumors and stories about your nightly dreams. Your so-called dreams is your opening to your intuitive senses that will allow you, the personal you, to excel beyond what you have previously known. Everyone has intuitive senses, and very few people take advantage of what is possible by recognizing something more than their mind can understand. Creation has its place for all of us, and then there is all life, which is far more than anything than what can become with creation. Everything we experience is necessary for us to survive with whatever we choose and decide our life to be. New Kevin Smith is the great witness to something more than what can be taught and learned in any school. It can be so that when anyone first listens to Kevin's intuitive side experiences, also known as real side experiences, from what their personal mind has known, Kevin's manner of expression will at first be rather different to comprehend. This is where this introduction and reading the new books and Facebook groups will help. Have fun deciding. DUANE the Great Writer and Seer.
In this real side experience, I would be traversing multi-dimensional creation with a seeming destination. The real awareness animating a body form inserted into the situation of what was set to transpire, as opposed to simply being afforded an observing view aside from the simulation, absent of interjection. Evidently then, my objective would be to exact alteration to simulated creational affairs in some shape or form, which can only be achieved as we operate through a form within a real side multi-dimensional creation. In reality, as everything transpiring in creation is based on agreement, that which is decided and created, or indeed the creations of others agreed with, we can't in reality exact change in regards to the affairs of others. We can only present alternative ideas and options that, if accepted, agreed with, and embraced, will effect then alternative, manifested circumstances. In actuality, we afford the means, options, and opportunity by which limiting and restricting ideas can be determined and released, and those that replace them present as more advantageous, awareness speaking, but ultimately, despite our best efforts, intentions, and capability, each individual decides their experience in a life based on the agreements they hold to, as to violate free will is in actuality an impossibility. And so it was that my journey would lead me to a portal of a kind, a seeming standard mechanism of a point-to-point travel multi-dimensionally in this simulator. And although the real awareness, as a part of the isness everything reality that animates through all consciousness idea-affected dimension and position, could simply have isolated the idea that was the desired destination effected, and the simulated form being utilized, manifest directly where intended to go, making use of these consciousness-decided mechanisms, portals and so forth, affords greater experiential detail, and coupled with such an outlandish means of transportation, from the human personal self-perspective at any rate, all this is an aid for retention of the experience on waking. I would find myself ultimately in a very dark and oppressive region of creation, although no specifics were forthcoming regarding my exact location. Impressions revealed that the position I was now occupying was once far different to how it currently appeared to be. That although it never was a say to the extent of a utopia, it was nevertheless a region that would have had appeal. For indeed, a large number of various and assorted body forms were positioned here, and had remained so as their dimensional spot transitioned from what it had been to what it had now become, a somewhat oppressive and a nightmarish realm shrouded in a darkness. What had caused such a drastic change to this dimensional position had been as a result of the influx of a group of very powerful and exceedingly ill-intended black witches, expressions of and in affiliation with the dark force simulator controllers. As I mentioned earlier, as each individual is the decider of that which befalls them simulation-wise, that others can not only enter our midst, but impact our experience and ourselves adversely, is only possible if we extend agreement allowing this to occur. This would extend to entire species also, that for a species to experience on a collective scale, the overall consciousness that is the species must have installed the idea effecting that which all the species participants will then be subjected to. That although technically the body forms operating throughout the dimension I had accessed via the portal were not a singular species, more a conglomeration of assorted body types, they still had formulated a collective consciousness. For to be in the constant experience of others, operating, say, within the same or similar circumstances and locational positions, our consciousness idea agreements must align with theirs, as it is the ideas that effect a simulation, and to share an experience with another, so the ideas manifesting such must be the same. Consequently, as our idea agreements align, as our experience converges, we formulate collectives in accordance with the ideas that bind us. And these various body forms were operating then as such a collective, where whatever befalls them in their entirety is agreement that their collective consciousness now contains. These ill-intended black magic practitioners, by whatever mechanism, had the idea that was their presence installed in these beings' collective consciousness, permitting them to now operate within the same position. Individuals can develop themselves however they desire, becoming as powerful and endowed with whatever magical abilities as they choose, but for such individuals to impact the experience of others with their powers, again, this requires agreement. Absent of the idea that a powerful magic practitioner can harm me, despite their best efforts, this cannot be simulation we share. In this case, then, not only was the idea of the witches present in the species' collective consciousness, but agreement also permitting them to exercise their ill-intended magical wielding as they saw fit. For indeed, the dark forces, in all their expressions, have a controlled simulator under their dictates, due to successfully moulding all consciousness, that effected are such overall creational circumstances preferable to them. In other words, agreement throughout all consciousness is extended to the dark forces, not only allowing their presence, but permitting their controlling, restricting, and destroying measures. This expresses then as the dark forces in all their expressions, able to make use of such agreement at any moment, that although individuals, and indeed species or collectives, may be bewildered as to how these evil characters can enter their midst at will, and deliver whatever carnage takes their fancy, in reality the recipients have agreed to such, laid out the welcome mat, and very likely these are agreements secured many lifetimes ago, that the perplexed slaves and the subjugated are unconscious and oblivious of. For no matter where or when, literally speaking, our agreements are secured, and even as we assume new body forms each lifetime around, and have no immediate access to the agreement ideas we formulated previously, every agreement we have made, every idea present in consciousness is retained until we face and release them all via the awareness process. For we are the complete effect of the consciousness we have created, and as I mentioned, it is a consciousness constructed generally according to dark force design, and this conglomeration of assorted beings then harboured agreements extended to the dark force controllers, as practically all in the simulator will, allowing any expression of the dark forces to impact their experience at any time of their choosing. In this case, a band of dark force associated witches had established themselves in what had been a relatively desirable dimensional location, and through their consistent black magic activities and operations they had tainted the realm, reducing it to the dark, festering, uninspiring position it now had become. I would take a moment to explore the dismal surroundings, not only a position now reminiscent of the lower astral, but present also with the various body forms and the witches, would be hordes of marauding zombies. It was as though, over time, the taint was infecting not only the land, but the inhabitants, and increasing numbers of them would become drone-like, cognitively impaired, losing all sensibility, and their only compulsion was to amble about aimlessly and attack anything that entered their midst. Necessary was it for me to take to the skies, ensuring I was beyond the zombies' grasping hands as I conducted my perusal of this situation. At one point I would land in a clearing, surrounded by the prevalent blackness and dead environment, and was approached by one of the dimension's inhabitants, one that hadn't suffered the zombie affliction, for want of a better reference. He was humanoid in appearance, as indeed most of the inhabitants were, with the slight variations that set them apart from the human body design, and indeed each other. He would greet me, and speak of how prophesied was it that an outsider would come and liberate them all from their predicament, ridding the land of the evil witches and their taint. The ill-intended black magicians had been stationed here now for what impressions revealed was quite the duration of years. He would reveal to me that not only had the witches decimated the land and caused the zombification process of ever-increasing numbers of the inhabitants through their twisted magical dabbling, but that they were now intending to utilize their magics to adversely impact other dimensional positions, using this current location as their base of operations. It seemed then this was my decided objective, to assist the beings from the malice of the witches, and that I had entered this affair at a moment where the witches were plotting to extend themselves, that their magic would now unduly impact still further dimensional positions, suggested this was the point where I could interject myself. That although we all have the free will right to create what we will, and indeed the recipients of the witches' destructiveness had in actuality agreement extended that the situation they were in could be so, even though we can't alter the ideas as agreed to by others, we can, as I mentioned, either present alternative options, ideas to be embraced instead, or we can manage the karma such destructive beings as the witches have accrued. For in a cause and effect creation, we are the effect of our choices and actions in equal reflective measure, and although we have the free will to create as we choose, and we may have secured agreement that allows our destruction of others, we still will meet our mirrored effects at some stage in regards to our own circumstances, creational positioning, and body form design. What can happen then is that the effects the destructive being is accumulating to be experienced in reflection of their ill-intended deeds can be managed, can be exchanged for alternatives along the same lines. The ill-intended being can, as an example, be displaced, or indeed, as everything is its reflected effect, a destructive idea will implode in on itself, as indeed all ideas of a restricting nature must, and we can in actuality be the delivery mechanism for this implosion. We can dismantle the ideas that are the affected dire circumstances, absent of the ideas and all that is manifested from them now removed, as though we deleted a file from a computer game and that which it rendered as graphics no longer exists. This would be my decided mechanism of assistance, simply managing effects the witches had manifested for themselves in such a way that I could dismantle that which was effecting this current situation as shared between themselves and the assorted humanoid beings that were subjected to their distortion, and preventing the witches then from executing their greater plan of impacting other dimensional positions adversely, although specifically what they intended to achieve was never revealed. Before I determined to embark on my chosen assignment, I would come across a new friend, Jeremy. He also was undertaking an objective or other in the same creational position, though one that deviated from my own as impressions revealed. He would be accompanied by another individual that wasn't identified, a male human, who advised that I shouldn't interfere with the situation that existed between the witches and the inhabitants. Jeremy, however, would dismiss his words with a wave of his hand, and indeed encourage me to proceed with my chosen assignment, and I would do so. I would, in fact, infiltrate the witches, posing as one of them, and on the surface seemingly be participating in their black magical activities, but in reality I was undermining their operation, as though sabotaging it subtly, lessening its impact, and at the same time operating multi-dimensionally and dismantling the very idea foundation that was themselves and their experience, gradually erasing the ideas that affected them and their dubious practices. This was a form of displacement, as though removing the idea of them from creation, although their awareness would be retained, just absent of a mechanism by which they could operate destructively. Visually rather nonsensical as this proceeded, but this was the overall impression of what I was doing, destructive idea disassembly. The witches had not only caused a curious zombification among the humanoid inhabitants, which was ongoing, but had also removed certain of them, those they deemed troublemakers, those most likely to be the potential interference factors and rebel arousers, and relocated them to random, alternative creational positions, where they would be forced to survive in environments and indeed other worlds and species alien to them. But as a part of my overall assignment, additionally I had the view, simultaneous to my pretense of being as one of the witches, but actually erasing the idea of them and their operation, of executing rescue missions, where I would transport to each of the displaced humanoids' positions in a spacecraft and extract them from their banishment, returning them to the dimension and position that was their home among the others of their collective. At one point it became apparent, as to my sabotaging efforts, that since my insertion into their group, the witches' magical practices seemed to be less potent and effective, as was my deliberate intention, and I was identified as the cause. The witches would elect to execute me as a traitor, and gathered within one of the darkened woods, so they intended to deliver my decided fate as according to them. But throughout I had been steadily dismantling the idea that was themselves and their adverse impact. They were becoming insubstantial, ghost-like. They had the appearance of humans also, though of a twisted design in reflection to their destructive choices and endeavours, and now they were absent of much of the magical ability they had developed. Everything that they were, based on ideas of the consciousness construct, was being undone. Their ability to even attempt my execution was no longer within their power. Their bodies lacking substance, translucent to the extent of barely presenting as a visible form. At that moment, a group of beings that impressions revealed were real guides would enter the scene as though to bear witness to this final moment, the removal of the idea of the witches from creation and their ability to operate destructively. And with a nod from the guides, I would proceed to complete my operation, removing the last vestiges of the idea of the witches, and they would fade from the scene. They were displaced, removed, unable to continue to impact the dimension they had positioned themselves within adversely, or its people, and indeed anywhere, or anyone else for that matter. There the experience would end, with myself as the delivery mechanism for effects really decided upon by the witches. And perhaps the taint they had caused the dimension of the humanoids to become would be rectified. The zombified humanoids may be restored with the witches now gone, but this was never revealed or as part of the experience. But with the idea that was the distortion now absent, in theory this ought to be the case, taking into consideration agreements with each respective humanoid participant as to their individual circumstance, with the additional bonus that the witches' intended impact on whatever other dimensions they desired to similarly decimate no longer was set to occur.